Hey everybody, welcome back to another edition of the Cool Sports Network. I am your host Chase Coburn, and today I am joined by a very special guest, a longtime physical therapist turned sports injury analyst for CBS Sports and formerly with ESPN, Marty Jaramillo. Marty, welcome to the show.
Chase, I am so excited to be here. Are you kidding me? I got street cred because you asked me to be on your show. My boys are like, "You're on Chase's show?" I'm like, "Yeah, he invited me." All of a sudden, I got street cred. I got the little bit of a cool factor today, so I can't thank you enough.
Thank you so much for coming on. I'm glad to hear that. Obviously, we're building a great fan base over here, so I'm so glad that you are able to come on and see some of my content, get to know me personally. But obviously, we're so excited to get to know you. You do so many great things in the world as an analyst, but you kind of got there in a different way. I want to ask you, when did you realize you even wanted to take your abilities as a physical therapist and as a medical professional, which I know you've been for a long time? When did you realize you wanted to take those abilities and turn them into becoming an analyst? And what has been your career path since as you've continued to grow in that journey?
Well, Chase, that's a great question. Well, my journey, if I may, to being a sports injury analyst on camera, on air, is really 100% by accident. I had the good fortune of having a lot of media personalities as patients of mine, specifically Chris Fowler from ESPN. And when he was rehabbing with me, just by coincidence, for a couple of years in a row, he always had an appointment on a Wednesday morning. And he'd come in to a session with me and bring the injury list for the game of the week on Saturday. And he'd simply look at me and say, "What do I need to know? What are my talking points for these injuries?" And they came pretty easy to me because I basically spent 30 years explaining very detailed surgeries, very detailed medical concepts, and actually try to make them easier for my patients to understand, whether they were professional athletes or the average weekend warrior. This difficult content, these medical terminology and procedures, I just kind of broke it down easily. And that came across to Chris, that I was able to take difficult concepts, make them easier for the consumer to understand. And one thing led to another. He said, "You would be great on air with us. We could really use you in the studio." I'm like, "I'm game." And a few years later, I was able to get my chance, and I broke through on air as the very first injury analyst on a live game with both Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit. It was a dream come true, having grown up with those guys. And I pinch myself every day that day happened. And I spent the entire year on ESPN on the ABC Game of the Week. I was able to be in the booth for the Rose Bowl and the national championship.
It's unbelievable. And I love that story because a lot of people, they take more of a stereotypical route, but you kind of got there without even knowing you were going to get there. And you essentially started now a space that different companies can have because we have rules analysts, we have different analysts involved in sports, but injuries are so important. I know a lot of what you cover, you work with betting lines and fantasy sports, and so many fans and bettors and even other analysts need to know about these different kinds of things. And it's one thing to report, okay, this guy has an ACL tear, but it's actually another thing to understand what that injury is actually like to give you a better understanding of the recovery time and things like that. So just explain your role quickly to us of exactly what an injury analyst does and whether that was with ESPN or CBS Sports, maybe how those roles are similar, exactly what your position that you created really tells us.
Well, I carved out a space without question, and once again, humbled and pinch myself every day to have been that. They call me, some of the executives at ESPN called me the Mike Pereira of sports injury analysts. To refresh your memory, Mike Pereira is the very first rules analyst, the referee on Fox Sports, and he created the space rules analyst. And I'm following in his footsteps, trying to create this space for injury analysts. Now, my job is really simple. When I speak about high profile injuries, my content populates not only breaking news of the day, but or within the game and betting and fantasy all in one piece of content. So it's very much very fast paced. Got to always be prepared, getting ready for how that injury can affect not only the practice of the week, the game that player is going to play in, but also betting lines and fantasy. And as you know, like someone like Christian McCaffrey, 8 weeks out, having been the number one draft pick for so many fantasy managers, it was a big deal that he returned.
Yeah, it was. And it kind of came out of nowhere as well. The whole McCaffrey injury. He wasn't even on the injury report for a while, and then boom, all of a sudden he's out for the Monday Night Football game, and all of a sudden he's placed on IR. So that was a really crazy scenario. I'm sure part of what helped you kind of get ready to be an analyst talking about sports injuries. You were a part of the New York Knicks medical team for a long time. How does previously being part of a professional team's medical staff just going to give you a better understanding now as an analyst about what a player is going through when he gets hurt, or kind of the chaos behind the scenes when a player gets hurt trying to make them recover?
Quite an intuitive question, Chase. So a little bit of background how I started. So I started working as a student athletic trainer at St. John's University under the tutelage of my mentor, Ron Lynn Font, who recently retired from St. John's after over 30 years at the university. I was his student working with the men's basketball team under the likes of the famed Lou Carnesecca and coaches of that level. And my senior year at St. John's, I was invited to become an intern for the New York Knicks in my senior year. And that's pretty much my career, getting these chances and taking full advantage of those chances, knowing that it's exactly that, just a chance to prove myself and bring my best. And when I worked for the New York Knicks, the first coach I worked for was Rick Pitino in his last season as the head coach of the Knicks. He went on to Kentucky after that. Then I went on to work with Stu Jackson, who not only became the Knicks coach, but also the founding coach of the Memphis Grizzlies, and then became on to be the commissioner of the Big East. After that, John McLeod, the Hall of Fame coach from the Suns. And then when I decided to leave the Knicks, having worked 3 seasons there, it wasn't an easy decision to make, but I was a certified athletic trainer there, and then went on to go to graduate school to become a physical therapist as well. Why? I wanted to marry all the different branches. The certified athletic trainer is on the sideline, on the side of the court, side of the field, on the side of the pitch, ready for those situations where they have to run on a field and manage a sports injury. So that is kind of like in the trenches type of work. But also once you manage them on the field, then the rehab begins, and that's where the physical therapy side of it. So I kind of married that. And at the same time, I also became a strength and conditioning coach. So all the different branches that work within any Division I team, any professional team, I really was proud to get the credentials in all 3 and kind of marry all 3. So when I decide to talk about injuries, it's really interesting, Chase, because oftentimes networks will ask someone like me not to speculate on an injury. And I've been very fortunate to have really folks in media, professionals in media, executives in media that really trusted my opinion. I would say to them, listen, when I'm talking about an injury on the field, I am talking what I would be thinking running onto that field, running onto that court. So as I'm running on towards my athlete, I am speculating exactly what it could be. Because if I didn't speculate, I wouldn't be doing my job. And that mindset is really what happens when I talk about injuries. What would I be thinking on the potential injuries this athlete has based on replay, based on what I saw, the various different, what we call mechanism of injury, how that injury happened, and the various structures that couldn't be involved based on that replay, what I saw, like I said, that mechanism of injury.
And now your job is essentially analyzing that as well, and trying to see what these injuries could be, and kind of speculating in a sense as well. Maybe not officially on air, but just kind of speculating in your mind. So you're ready to make a report. Last Monday Night Football, and you guys, if you're listening to this at a different time, last Monday Night Football, meaning the Chiefs game versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on ESPN Monday Night Football, Patrick Mahomes limped off the field on what appeared to be a non-contact ankle injury. Just kind of did a little bit of a jump pass, and he seemed to have twisted his ankle, and he had to limp off the field, and it was crazy. He ended up returning to the game. He didn't miss any time. In a scenario like that, especially with such a star player like Mahomes, one of the greatest players in the world, what are you looking for, both as a physical therapist and as an analyst, to determine whether he'll be okay and be able to play further?
Great question, Chase. Well, the silence was deafening as Patrick Mahomes was walking off the field and being helped off and limping, and you heard the dismay in all the fans. Now, it was a re-aggravation of something he's already been dealing with. I knew that. I also know that with an ankle sprain, those ligaments are so elastic. And on replay, sometimes when that ankle turns, it can be gruesome, but it's like a rubber band. They pull and they snap back. A couple of moments of some pain, some irritation, a little bit of worry, a little bit of limping, and they did kind of settle in, and he's back. Not to mention the adrenaline of playing a game, it just pushes them that much further. So I had less concern after a few minutes and see him ready to go. You saw him jogging up and down the sideline. I wasn't concerned. And he dealt with it this week and had an amazing game, as you saw.
Yeah, the Chiefs were able to pull out a very interesting win there. Who knows if that field goal would have gone, it would have been over. But the Chiefs they're able to stay undefeated. But yeah, that is something Mahomes has dealt with in the past. We saw in the Super Bowl game a few years ago against Philadelphia in that postseason run, he was dealing with an ankle injury and he was hurt at halftime. I remember, and fans were getting worried there. It feels like him and that team just seem invincible at this point. They're looking for a third straight title. Now, just beyond your work with football, and that's I think the main sport you do cover, you do also work with basketball and baseball, the NBA and the MLB. And I've spoken with many professionals about this, but not really in the medical side, about these pitching injuries and having to have Tommy John surgeries and surgeries in your arm and in your shoulder. In an ESPN column in August, the writer said we are interested in increasing the an MLB official told ESPN in an August column, we are interested in increasing the amount of action in the game, restoring the prominence of the starting pitcher, and reducing the prevalence of pitching injuries. There are a whole host of options in addressing those issues. One of those issues, or one of those propositions that has come up, is requiring a pitcher to pitch at least 6 innings, that they don't pitch with as much velocity and they would have to make it to 6 innings. There are a few loopholes to that rule, but do you believe something like that or something beyond along those lines as a rule kind of change or implement would help this matter? If not, what will?
Well, that is a loaded question. We can have a whole podcast just on Tommy John surgery and shoulder. Listen, just recently, Fernando Valenzuela passed away. In his Cy Young winning year, he had over 20 wins and 19 and possibly, I think it was 18 or 19 complete game shutouts. Think about that, right? 20 winning game and 19 shutouts, complete game. What does that tell you? It's a different game. Justin Verlander has gone on record that he used to pace his starts with the gradual increase in velocity, which you discuss. Now, come out, go as fast as you possibly can, and we'll see. And that creates their breakdown. There's so many issues that is leading to this breakdown. First, so many players in the major leagues are coming to the minor leagues, major leagues as pros with a Tommy John injury. That is unheard of. What does that tell you? That gives you pause that young kids are throwing way too hard, using too much elbow to create torque and movement and spin in those pitches. That's number one. What are we doing with the young kids? What are we doing with young kids, teaching them how to throw curves and change ups and the spin rate? Now, we have gotten rid of the tacky substance. You see the umpires check for tacky substance. But what does that cause? Without the tacky substance, every single player has changed the grip and changed the spin rate to the complete opposite direction to create the same spin that we looked before the tacky substance. So I've spoken to many of the professionals. They are recommending to try to find a compromise and maybe get a legalized tacky substance so there's less stress on the elbow. It's really fascinating things. I'll give you an example. Shohei Ohtani, I'll send you a video that I did interviewing the team physician of the Dodgers, the famed Neil Elitrash, who not only did Aaron Rodgers' Achilles, but he also did Shohei Ohtani's Tommy John surgery. Now, he fixed Shohei's elbow the first time as a rookie coming out of Japan. He, during rehab, was able to increase his velocity from 98 to 103 miles an hour post-rehab using heavy balls, which is the absolute worst. Yes, he increases velocity, and what happened? He tore it again. Now, let me give you a startling stat. After your first Tommy John surgery, there's only the median, right? Just the average innings available for a pitcher is about 106 innings left. That's it. That's the average. Doesn't mean everyone, but as soon as you have your first Tommy John, the clock starts and you have X amount of innings left in that elbow. Second Tommy John, we don't have any data. We have no data on that second Tommy John. That means it's going to be even less than that. And that's an absolute shame what's happening to the game. At the beginning of this past season, I reported that 20% of all starting pitchers, 20% of all starting pitchers in the major leagues were having Tommy John surgery. Just think about the magnitude of that. So that is not necessarily because of Major League Baseball. That's what they came to the game with.
Right.
And then you have someone like a veteran like Justin Verlander who's saying, I've never pitched like this. I gradually increased my speed. Now I have to go all out. And what if you're tired? What if you're not loosened? What if you're having a bad day, rest, whatever it is, right? You can't do that. You can't sustain that. It's unsustainable. So much so that many of the experts in mechanics are going back to some of the old timers, Nolan Ryan, Tom Seaver, looking at their mechanics. They had the most complete games of any pitcher in history. Why? They used their legs so much more. Tom Seaver used to wear out his back knee, the pants of his back uniform. Every single game, he would wear it out. He'd have the new pair of pants every single game because he wore out the knee section of his back leg because he used those legs to drive, right? So we're going back to look, what did they do right? Because the amount of total games and complete games is just incredible. But we have a lot of work to do at the kids level.
Yes, it appears like the training going into the game has to be a little different. It's interesting kind of how we've come to this, and I think we do need to look back. A lot of people call these older eras of sports, the Bill Russell Celtics era or the Babe Ruth baseball era. They call it, like the plumber era, like plumbers were playing against them, even though I think it was different. It was different. They were just trained to play differently. And I think if we kind of trained to kind of back down a little bit from some of the stuff, it would be huge. And you mentioned like having 106 innings left after one, and then you don't even know what it is after two. You have to think as well, the more and more surgeries and the more and more you pitch after Tommy John surgeries, it's only going to affect your arm. Like I know over on the football side, Drew Brees said he can no longer throw with his right arm, and he has to play catch with his kids with his left hand. And it kind of brings up the question of, okay, do you want to take this risk to maybe pitch more innings or throw more footballs in your career, but you may be sacrificing some things in your future life? Now, I know we're kind of going all over the place. I do want to get back to the NFL, though.
Okay, absolutely.
Because it brings up an interesting point. When we talk about like sacrificing different things for your career compared to your personal life, the conversation has been there for Tua Tagovailoa. Obviously, we've seen a lot of the things that have happened. He's had multiple concussions over multiple seasons, and there's been a lot of conversation about whether or not he should play. Or retire even. What are your thoughts on that? And if he should maybe call at the end, like how much risk is he at if he continues to do this and continues to suffer concussions?
Well, Chase, you bring up a topic that is very dear to my heart, a very serious topic. And here's what we know about Tua. First, he's had 3 concussions that we know of, that we've seen on national television. But by the time a player of any position gets to the NFL, they've had more than one documented concussion. And so 3 that we know of, who knows how many. So there's a lot more than just 3. But here's the problem. The last 2 were severe. How do we know that? Well, he had a textbook sign called a fencing posture. So he hit his head in the last concussion. He hit his head twice. First on impact forward, and then when he landed back. So it was almost a 1-2 punch in his head. And when he landed, his arm went straight. Okay. And it's called a fencing posture because it's very much like the on guard position in the sport of fencing. And unfortunately, that's a textbook sign of severe brain trauma. It is what it is. That's what it doesn't matter whether it's football, a car accident, falling. That is a textbook sign. Now, the brain is very plastic and the brain does heal. So I, like many veterans, like many medical personnel, jumped on the bandwagon hoping that he would retire. Why? Well, because we know the brain heals and he will pass concussion protocol as he did. He came back. But the issue is many years later. That's the issue. We just don't know. We know he'll pass concussion protocol. We know the brain is plastic and will heal, but we know the issues are much more long term, as many of the veteran players will tell you. If you shouldn't have that many concussions. Now, when he wasn't being stubborn, he was doing what was best for him, his family, and the passion he has for the game. So I don't fault him, because I asked myself, we've had this conversation on air with many folks, if I was having a conversation with my 25-year-old self after having had an MVP level season, and then try to convince myself you're never going to play again, but you feel fine, I know how that conversation is going to go. I'm going to play.
Right. And it's interesting. And I feel like it's a topic that I don't think a lot of people talk about, is like these younger players, do they make the right decisions based on injury, or even based on, or I'm bringing up a totally different topic here, but money. I mean, there was a stat that I think years ago, 78% of NFL players were bankrupt at one point in their life. And it's just like, well, all these different things, because you get these athletes and they're in their prime from, 20 to 28 years old. Like that's the window. But then at the same time, you have to wonder, do you trust 20 and 28-year-olds to make the best decisions for their long-term life? So it's kind of interesting to think about as well. And it brings up a whole other topic in the world of sports.
It's a good question. Let me interject on that.
Yeah.
Number one, the decision to play is very collaborative. He did talk to many different experts, many of them saying the same thing. Yes, you'll heal. We don't know about the future, but he's feeling okay, and he did pass concussion protocol. Now, financially, what's interesting about it is that most salaries are covered by insurance. Okay, so if a player has to leave the sport for whatever reason, medical reason, a lot of that contract is covered by insurance, and neither the player or the team gets hurt. But when you have a high-profile player like Tua, the insurance company can go to the team and say, we will cover your players, except Tua can't have another concussion, or we won't cover that. So it's a little bit of a balancing act. But you're right, financial concerns have to come into the game. You want to hear a crazy stat about finance in the NFL?
Let's hear it.
So to get your pension, do you know what a pension is? Okay, basically it's your retirement package. Okay, so to get your pension in the NFL, you have to be on a team for 4 years, right? An active roster for 4 years. But the average career is 3.4. So think about that. If you make it to 4 years, you make a lot of money every year for the rest of your life, even if you only play 4 years. That's like hitting the lottery for an NFL player. Think about it. 4 years to play, but the average career is so much less than that. And it's a shame. That's the brutality of the game. So if you do get the 4 years, you've hit the lottery for so many of these players.
It's so interesting kind of when you bring that up. If we transition over to the NBA, because the NBA is probably not as talked about with injuries, but there are still injuries.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it's an offensive league. But what I found so interesting when I was doing research, about one fourth of NBA injuries come from ankle sprains, and those are usually caused by moving forcefully on defense. So a lot of lateral movement, and that could be because of the advancements in the rules they made on offense, and also how they don't call as many fouls. So you can't be as physical, and you have to move more laterally and more quickly at the same time. Do you feel kind of the NBA's goal of more offensive success and more points on the board to entice fans is actually causing their players to get hurt more?
Wow. Chase, you're not going to do like a weekly show. This is some cool stuff you're bringing up, man. You've asked me about why have I been successful, right? It's because I've always feel I'm prepared, right? That's what I'm always prepared for the worst case scenario. And that's why I'm never nervous to go on camera and speak to millions of people. And I see that in you, and I can't congratulate you enough. You are on point about so much of this for all different sports. So NBA. All right, you want to go there? Let's go. So 2012, the NBA started measuring speed of the game. They use GPS technology to measure distance, total distance a player has run, as well as speed, velocity, etc. They did it for every single player, every single game, and every single team from 2012. Why? Right? Because a Hall of Fame coach, Greg Popovich, used this term, what used to be called a throwaway term. He used a term called load management. Why? Because he didn't want to play the star players. Why are you resting them, coach? I don't know. I'm going to manage their load. What? Load management. No one knew what that was. It was just his way to rest his star players towards the end of the regular season to get them ready for the playoffs. So NBA couldn't do anything about it. He could make up any injury that they were dealing with, and they were resting. So the NBA said, okay, let's get some data. So in 10 years, from 2012 to 2023, in 2012, less than 1% of the league, and the league is about 450 players, give or take, any given year. Okay, only 450 NBA players, give or take, depending on roster sizes, et cetera.
Right.
So less than 1% ran a total of 3 miles. Total in a game, 3 miles. Okay? 10 years later, over 20% run 3.5 miles, right? And on average, over 70 more fast breaks. Picture that. So we went in 2012, and I'm not going to ask you how old you were then. In 2012, we went what's known as the bump and grind offense, right? The Michael Jordan days, to what's now called space and pace. Every single player, every single position has to run a significant amount, right? And cover a lot more ground. For some of the big players, right, Zion Williamson's, their bodies are breaking down. Okay, you just heard Chet Holmgren just collapsed and broke his pelvis, right? Wemby's one injury away from just having a shortened career, right? It's a completely different game. What we are seeing now in the NBA is injuries that we see in the NFL. We're seeing high velocity collision injuries. We're seeing broken noses. We're seeing fractured lungs. We are seeing collapsed lungs. We're seeing high impact injuries that we only see in the NFL, and now we're seeing them in the NBA because of that speed. So the NBA is looking at a lot of this data and is helping teams work on recovery, and which is such an important part of every professional athlete's career. But the speed of the game is something that has changed significantly. Now the training protocols, players have to be able to run 3.5 miles straight. So I'm also currently, I still work with the St. John's basketball team. And we've been measuring a lot of the biometric sensors and how much they're averaging in practice, 5 miles. 5 miles. What does that mean? That's an NBA level practice at a Division I program, right? So those players, if they are ready to take it to the next level, are ready for the space and pace because they practice that way. And that's what's changed. Even a big man has to be able to run 3.5 miles straight to get his body used to the impact, the speed, and what comes with that.
And that was my worry. That was my worry with Victor Wembanyama going in. Is I made a crazy take on the show, and I'm probably wrong with the way he has played. But I said that Victor Wembanyama was going to be a bust, and I said that all of the talent and all the abilities that he possesses in his repertoire, I guess you could say, of the many great things he could do, will be shortened due to injuries. And so his prime will be shortened and he won't be able to do as much. And now we're talking about this conversation with Wemby, and I hope not. I love Wemby's game. I love watching Wemby, but we are kind of getting toward that discussion of how much longer can he sustain this with these injuries. But we're talking about the NBA, we're talking about the MLB, and we're talking about rules that they can add or things that they can do or things that they're looking at to change and prevent this. The NFL has already done something to do it. This offseason was a huge thing that changed the NFL this season. They made serious changes to their kickoff rules, and then they banned the hip drop tackle. Do you feel these preventative actions have actually prevented injuries to the extent that the NFL was hoping for going into it?
Oh, without question. Listen, the NFL has to be applauded for so many different efforts that they've put towards player safety, player health, and definitely injury prevention. It is a monumental task in looking at the various metrics and data around injury and injury performance and the forces involved. The hip drop tackle, I wish it started a little bit earlier, but that was a big one. I mean, that tackle is the way it's done is when a defender grabs the waist, they literally it's almost a rodeo tackle. If you ever seen cowboys when they bring down a cat, it's very similar. Just rotate them. So as a player, normally you can react to any kind of change, sudden change or force. You have no time to react. You just go down. So it's hard to protect yourself. And the whole game of football as a player is to be able to defend yourself at all times. And with a hip drop tackle, you can't. And oftentimes the defender then lands on one of your legs, forcing the knee to buckle inwards and or the ankle. So it's a very dangerous. So that's a great one to ban. But at high speeds, tough for a referee to see it. Next, research on concussions has been tremendous. They've recently approved 5 different style helmets for different positions and different levels of safety, and players have a
Guardian
choice.
cap too. I didn't even think that would be allowed to be used in game. Can you actually, now that you're on this topic of helmets, tell us about that? Because when you look at the Guardian cap, it doesn't look like something you should be allowed to wear. Like, does it actually give players a benefit?
Yeah, over 10% benefit. So it can't prevent a concussion per se, but this is what it does do. These space age foams help dissipate the force, just spread the force out of an impact. So because force is transferred across layers. So Guardian helmet with that foam gets transferred into the helmet and then to the foams of the helmet. So by the time it gets to the skull, that force has dissipated. Does that make sense? Right?
Yes.
So the Guardian helmet is an amazing, amazing thing. And I love to see it in youth sports when the whole team has it. That's where it really, really matters. Now, Tua had a chance to wear one, chose not to. I really felt he had an opportunity to show, I believe in my safety. It would have been great to see him wear it because you do look odd wearing it because it's kind of a big thing, right? But if he sees himself wearing it and other people see him wearing it, then other people are going to do it. And I do think over the years, you'll see more and more folks wearing the Guardian helmet on top of one of the 5 approved helmets, which are all absolutely amazing. Even though recently, if you look at Aaron Rodgers' helmet, his is slightly more dome shaped, more bubble, all to dissipate those forces. So that's another great advancement. And I think it'll continue to advance. There are many manufacturers working on how to dissipate those forces, and hopefully that'll continue. The kickoff rules, I do like that. Many of us, as a football fan, we kind of miss that impact. But for a stationary player who may forget or doesn't a fair catch or not signal it fast enough, there's a person moving as fast as they possibly can going at you, and you're stationary. And that could create significant amount of injuries, not only concussion, but other injuries. So I think for the Ivy League was the first to start that, by the way, if you didn't know. And it's good to see the injuries have gone down there. So between hip drop tackle, the concussion and the helmet improvements, and then the kickoff rules and all the data they're collecting across all different sports and all different types of injury. And of course, turf. That's another conversation on the different types of turf and those injuries.
Yeah, now the NFL has probably done the best job out of all these professional leagues at preventing some of these injuries. But you mentioned the banning of the hip drop tackle maybe it was late. I think last year there were many injuries that were caused from it that kind of forced the NFL in a sense to ban it. One of which was Mark Andrews' injury against Cincinnati, where Logan Wilson used the now banned defensive action to take him down. Andrews missed essentially the rest of the season, played one more game, really in the postseason, but could have ended most players' season. Very little players actually get to the Final Four. Is there a rule that the NFL should add, or I guess you could also say like the hip drop tackle, take away before it hurts any players down the line?
Well, like I said, sometimes hard to pick up because in in the battle, the heat of battle. Your job is to bring that player down. And once you wrap them up, you do whatever it takes. And it's very difficult to change the momentum, your own momentum, while the player you're trying to bring down has their momentum. It's hard to change that in a split second. It's easier not to lead with your head. That's a great one. Now we didn't talk about that one. More and more players are realizing not to dip their head and use their head to spear or as a battering ram. So that's great. I do think it starts early in the season. Players who might be suspected of a hip drop tackle, maybe a warning. If they do it again, second warning, and maybe suspension with that. I think that might be helpful. It's a dangerous, dangerous tackle. But once again, it's all about repetition. More of these defenders learn how not to do it and come up with different ways. I think it'll just become more second nature across the league.
Marty Jaramillo, I've really appreciated talking about this because it's so interesting how a lot of these fans, they just look at injuries and they go to the main reporters, and we've had some of those on, some of the main analysts, the insiders like Adam Schefter, Dan Graziano. We've had those guys on. They're great at what they do, and they go to them. Right, and they go to them for the news, but it was very interesting to talk to you about what exactly those injuries mean, ways to prevent them, and why they are happening. Obviously, you're doing some incredible stuff. And it kind of happened accidentally and kind of in between. I don't even know if you've known it, but you've kind of already given pieces of advice during this podcast. I always end every one of my interviews asking, if you had to give one piece of advice to the profession you're in, what would it be? Marty Jaramillo, if you had to give one piece of advice to this brand new market you're trying to start of a sports injury analyst, if someone wants to do that one day, what would your biggest piece of advice be to them and why?
Well, to my understanding, no network's actually not looking for any injury analysts. I got very lucky, and I applaud ESPN who given me a chance, and then CBS scooped me up. And the audience is changing in sports. I come from the time when I want to watch TV on the biggest of screens possible. If I have an 80-inch screen, I am very happy. But the younger audience, they watch on their phone, they watch on their laptop, and they are also very happy. The audience is changing. It's an on-demand audience, and it's also what's known as a fast channel audience, bouncing between streaming networks and streaming channels. So in the event someone gets a chance to be a sports injury analyst, number one is be 100% prepared, beyond prepared, because you never know. I learned that from my mentors, Ronald Font from St. John's, director of sports medicine for over 30 years. And then after that, the legendary Mike Saunders from the New York Knicks, also a legend in the NBA. And the amount of preparation that I observed, it was mind-boggling because they always prepared for the worst case scenarios. Now, today, I am reporting on those potential worst case scenarios, and that kind of prep has been really helpful. To complement what I also said is the audience member, the consumer, the fan, they really don't care how smart you are. They really don't. They want you to just give it to them straight, make it easy for them to digest and to consume, and then move on. Too many folks on Twitter, these wannabe doctors, wannabe injury analysts, they're all over the place, and they all reach out to me. How'd you get that job? How'd you do that? I just didn't have to, pound my chest and tell them how smart I am. It doesn't matter. I just kept it simple, and that's what helped me succeed. And I'm proud to be a trailblazer. I know there'll be many, many after me, and I'm excited to help them in any way. But to be the first, like Mike Pereira, is something I'm so proud to be that trailblazer. And more importantly, I want to be invited back on your show.
I would love it. Let's do it. I would love it, especially with new injuries and new rules to come out. Maybe if the MLB makes a change or something like that, yes, we will be sure to have you back on. Marty Jaramillo, I really do appreciate this. Thank you so much for coming on, and I really appreciated this discussion. I think we learned a lot today.
Chase, an honor was all mine. You're well on your way. I love your show. I love what you're doing. And guess what? You are always prepared. Your research is right on point. An absolute privilege, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you so much. For the audience who will wrap this up alongside the CBS Sports injury analyst, Marty Jaramillo. I'm your host, Chase Coburn. We will see you next time right here from the Cool Sports Network. Take care.